Oh, you sucker. Mr. Mayor, council members, I seem to be having a camera problem. This happened earlier, so you'll see horizontal lines across the screen. My apologies. I might be able to tinker with it, but I don't know that I can fix it.
Smack it with a hammer.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the appointed hour of 7 o'clock, and I'd like to call the May 20, 2021 Lexington City Council meeting to order. First item of business, if you could all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the
Flag
of
of the United States of America,
America,
Stands
and to the
one
republic
under God,
for which it stands,
and one nation,
for all.
under God,
God,
indivisible,
liberty and justice for all.
for all.
Thank you all very much. Next item is consideration of the agenda. There is an addition of 15.2 under new business and a proposal from 4 swimming. And also under a modification, if you will, under 15.1, it reads consideration of a cigarette tax. This is the first look at it, so there will be no consideration, but please insert discussion for consideration. And are there any other additions or observations on the agenda? Hearing none, we will adopt the agenda with those 2 modifications. Next, we'd like to move into proclamations and offer the following. A proclamation expressing the appreciation of the Mayor and City Council of Lexington, Virginia, to the City of Lexington Fire Department and local emergency medical service agencies and providers. Whereas the Congress and President of the United States have designated May 16 through May 22 as National Emergency Medical Services Week. And whereas the men and women of the City of Lexington Fire Department and all EMS agencies serving the City of Lexington, Rockbridge County, and the City of Buena Vista provide a vital public service by responding to the EMS needs of our residents and visitors. And whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the duties, responsibilities, hazards, and sacrifices of their local EMS providers. And whereas the safety of our citizens is a primary goal of local, state, and national government. And whereas EMS providers are often among the first to arrive upon the scene of emergencies and disasters, be they medical, natural, or man-made, to provide immediate and often life-saving assistance while fulfilling their mission to provide the best pre-hospital care. And whereas EMS providers participate in numerous hours of rigorous training and continuing education in order to enhance their life-saving skills, and thereby dramatically improve the survival and recovery rate of their patients. And whereas EMS providers and agencies demonstrate a high level of commitment and dedication to their communities and fellow citizens by providing training, health screenings, and other life safety awareness programs in their respective localities. Now, therefore, we, the Mayor and Lexington City Council, call upon all citizens of Lexington to observe the week of May 16 through May 22nd, 2021 as Emergency Medical Services Week, during which all of our residents may join in celebrating the dedication of our local EMS providers, past and present, and their families, whose support allows them to serve our community. Adopted this 20th day of May 2021. And I think it's worth noting, especially through the pandemic, the things that went on behind the scenes and the efforts that were taken, especially when we got to the point of a vaccination, and the hours that EMS and other professionals in our community and first responders did to support us all with the vaccination. So Ty, I think you're with us. Present that in earnest to you on behalf of a grateful council and a grateful city.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of the men and women of the Lexington Fire Department, we appreciate your thoughts and your comments.
Thank you for stepping in harm's way and making life much more enjoyable for us, knowing that you're out there and looking out for us. Next, I'd like to offer a proclamation, the National Public Works Week, also May 16 through 23, 2021, Stronger Together. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the people of the city of Lexington. And whereas these infrastructure, facilities, and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals who are engineers, managers, and employers at all levels of government and the private sector, who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our nation's transportation, water supply, water treatment, and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our citizens. And whereas it is in the public interest for the citizens, civic leaders, and children in the city of Lexington to gain knowledge of and to maintain an ongoing interest and understanding of the importance of public works and public works programs in their respective communities. And whereas the year 2021 marks the 61st annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association, Canadian Public Works Association. Be it now resolved, we, the Mayor and City Council of the City of Lexington, do hereby designate the week May 16 through 2021 as National Public Works Week. I urge all citizens to join with representatives of the American Public Works Association, Canadian Public Works Association, and government agencies in activities, events, and ceremonies designed to pay tribute to our public works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees, and to recognize the substantial contributions they make to protecting our national health, safety, and quality of life. Adopted this 20th day of May 2021. Jeff Martone, I believe you're with us and want to also present this from a humble and grateful council, as well as a grateful community, the greater Lexington community. The work that you all do to keep our water flowing, safe water, and quality water, and sewage disposal, the streets, snow removal, goes on and on. We are extremely grateful for the work that you and your team do. The next item on the agenda are presentations, the fiscal year 2021 third quarter financial report. And I'll call on Jake Adams, unless City Manager wants to intro.
Thank you, Jake.
Mayor. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council members. Very pleased to present to you our third quarter FY21 financials this evening. Third quarter was very strong, ended very strong. I think we're lined up for a very strong and positive close to the fiscal year at this point, 9 months through. So I wanted to present this report tonight. I'm going to go through and kind of hit upon the highlights. And then I know there were some questions at the last meeting on where we stand revenue wise compared to a year ago and then 2 years ago. So I prepared some of our revenue graphs at the end, looking at our big local tax categories and a look back to where we were in FY20 and FY19 to kind of get a gauge of where revenues stand. So with that being said, I'm going to dive right in and just again touch on the highlights in the report. So as far as general fund revenues, overall revenues are at 75% of budget through the third quarter, which is great, and obviously in line with where we want to be. However, this is with only a little over 50%, 56% of property taxes, which is a large chunk of our general fund revenue received. So we still have a lot to go. Property taxes are going to be due typically June 5th, but June 7th this year due to the 5th falling on Saturday. So a lot of that activity is not yet reflected in the quarterly report. We'll see that in the fourth quarter, but I see that daily coming in with the Treasurer's Office. Tax collections are extremely strong. They're very busy over there taking in tax payments. So no concerns with property taxes whatsoever at this juncture. Perhaps the strongest and most encouraging news at the end of the third quarter is our other local taxes, as I mentioned. So our April collections for this report, I have accrued back into the third quarter report, and I'm trying to give the most accurate reflection of where we stand revenue-wise through 3 quarters of the year. So due to the lag between collections and transactions, you'll see some revenues accrued back in this report. So through the third quarter, sales tax is actually up about 1.7% over FY20, which is incredible. We've actually seen just shy of 2% in sales tax growth from a year ago, which I would largely think has a lot to do with e-commerce and sales revenue being strong through that medium over the last year with COVID and quarantining in place. One or two minor corrections to note. I don't think it made it into the final draft that you see. Meals tax are actually only down 11% from FY20. It says 18, I know in the report, but that should be 11%. And lodging taxes, after a strong third quarter recovery, are now down only by 18% instead of 33%. So 2 minor corrections there to note for you. Apologize for that. So overall, some very encouraging news through the third quarter. Our sales tax is at 105% of budget. Meals tax is at 105 and lodging is at 83. And lodging has overall been the hardest hit single tax revenue category, but 83% through 3 quarters is certainly very encouraging. Additionally, our B-poll tax, we had budgeted significant reductions in that for this fiscal year, not knowing what the impact on our business community would be. As of the end of March, and these tax payments were due March 1st, that stands at 171% of budget for the year. So much higher than we anticipated, significant collections in that category. And overall, other local taxes, that entire revenue category is already at 100% of budget through the end of the third quarter. And we still have 3 months of collections to go for sales, meals, lodging taxes. So very, very encouraging news. I think we'll finish far ahead of what we anticipated a year ago in all of these tax categories. Permits and licenses continue to be high. Building permits have been considerably higher for the year. A lot of construction projects going on in town. So that category is overall at 116% of budget. The 2 single most impacted categories in our general fund revenues, fines and forfeitures, and then interest earnings have been sluggish and will continue to be so, to be as such for some time, we would envision, as things begin to recover. But interest revenues will still be sluggish for the foreseeable future. The good news is here that these 2 categories are only 0.3% and 1.6% of our revenue budget. So not a significant chunk of revenue, but worth noting the decrease in revenue nonetheless. Overall, no other concerns with revenue. Recovered cost is only at 4%. Just wanted to point out that this is a lot of our year-end settlement for joint services with the county that's reflected in this category. We won't see that until the end of the fiscal year. But really no other concerns with revenue, just very strong news to report in this area. Moving on into general fund expenses. Again, no real areas of particular concern. Overall, general fund expenses are at 74%, so that's pretty much right on target with what you would expect to see through 9 months of the fiscal year. So really no areas of particular concern at this juncture. Moving on into the school fund, just briefly to summarize, no real updates from our last financial report on the school fund. Revenues continue to come in a little bit higher from the state than anticipated. There's also higher federal revenues, of course, from some of the CARES funding that the school has received separately from its city allocations. And revenues continue to outpace expenses overall for the school fund. So I know Tommy Roberts and Rebecca Walters are anticipating finishing the year strong with revenues exceeding total expenses at this point. They've realized some savings in some expense categories due to being remote for the first part of the year, and some savings with field trips and other type of expenses that you would normally see if classes were in person. So no particular updates for the school fund, but again, revenues are tracking ahead of expenses so far through the third quarter. Moving on to the utility fund, and this is where some of the items of concern, I guess the only small items of concern in the overall financial report. Again, for the revenues on the utility fund, I've accrued back our April billings into the third quarter report since it largely reflects water usage in March. We are lagging behind where we should be through 9 months. So looking at on a straight line method, looking at the full fiscal year, we should be at about 75% of revenues. We're only at about 69% of water sewer revenues. So I think this has a lot to do with the reduced consumption we saw in the second quarter, students going home earlier than usual in the fiscal year and coming back a little bit later. And then just with overall COVID closures and reduced activity in town, I think has had some impact on consumption this year. So there's some encouraging news. Our latest billings represented a 12% increase from March to April. So that's encouraging. I think consumption is now bouncing back, and I think we'll have 3 strong months to close out the year. I don't know if we will make revenue projections for the year at this point. And as we'll touch on in the charts a little bit later on in the report, we may fall short of revenues by a small margin. But we're optimistic that the deficit will be overcome somewhat in these last 3 months. The trends are encouraging somewhat. As far as expenses in the utility fund, this is going to be low for the year, and this has a lot to do with capital projects. As you may recall, the Diamond Hill area water sewer project was budgeted for FY21 to be expensed out of fund balance. However, obviously that course has kind of changed with the need to finance this project, and as the project cost has increased. So this overall budget will be low for the year with those capital projects budgeted in. Taking out capital projects, overall utility fund expenses are at 77% of budget. So a little bit higher than what you would like to see at this point of year. The single biggest area of concern is wastewater operations. So through the third quarter, that's at 92% of budget. We had a significant wastewater bill come in from the MSA. I think a lot of that had to do with the precipitation and winter weather that we saw from January through March. Snow melt that's finding its way into the sewer system. So again, I sound like a broken record, but I&I continues to be an issue. I think we've budgeted accordingly to kind of anticipate a little bit of that and the recent rainfall trends we've seen in our FY22 budget, but nonetheless continues to be a significant problem for wastewater operations. No real items to note on the equipment replacement fund, just some of the equipment replacements that we've built back into the budget this past year are reflected here. And thankfully, a lot of these have come in under budget. I know the ambulance has finally arrived that Chief Dickerson and the fire department had placed an order 4 months ago, and that came in a good bit under budget from what we had appropriated for this purchase. So some of these are coming in lower than budget, and that's good to see some savings there.
Jake, can I ask a quick question going back to the wastewater?
Yes.
Because you're right, you joked that you sounded like a broken record, but I mean, there's a little truth to that. And, in our budget, quarterly financials for years. And you mentioned that we thought that we're budgeting accordingly, but I guess we're not. So as we budgeted for FY22, are we again just, taking what we believe will be the costs for wastewater and I&I, and are we just multiplying that by a certain factor because we continue to get it, pretty wrong, and it's no one's fault. It's a 100-year-old infrastructure that we have. But we were projecting one set of increases, water and sewer increases, and we backed it off from 8% to roughly 5% overall for the FY22. And so I bring that up, and just your thoughts if we continue to try to budget accordingly for that line item.
Yeah, well, thank you, David. That's a great question. I did for the FY22 budget make a significant adjustment to wastewater operations from what we had planned the last several years. It consistently seemed to be under budget, and some of the the anticipated usage estimates that we see, especially coming from the MSA over the last few years, I thought to be very much so on the low side. So with the FY22 budget, I do feel confident that I have budgeted enough funding in wastewater operations to cover anticipated I&I. And hopefully, I mean, we can all keep our fingers crossed and hope for a little bit drier weather this coming year, and maybe we'll see some savings. But I do think that we've built in an appropriate amount in wastewater to cover I&I for FY22. It was one thing that I noticed looking back, what we've seen so far in FY21 in the past few fiscal years, and I wanted to make a adjustment that I thought was appropriate to cover that moving forward.
I appreciate that. And do you ever compare notes with the Public Service Authority, with Rockbridge County, to see if, you know, their wastewater bills are also extremely high, or if they're having trouble tracking that? I realize some of their infrastructure may not be as old as ours, certainly, but just again, just wondering if they experience that too.
That's a good question too. I'm sure to some degree. I think Jeff overall has a greater knowledge of those, you know, what he's seeing from the PSA and compared to our I&I issues. I think he would probably have a little bit better in-depth analysis, but that's certainly something I'll look into and question Jeff about, see if we can kind of compare where we are to the PSA.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we should start seeing some reduction in I&I based on city council investment in trying to spend, and not trying, and actually spending the money and buying that digger machine. And I know Jeff's doing the work, but I'm really eager to start seeing those numbers drop as a result of that work being accomplished.
Yes, and you know, one of the big facets of our I&I improvement plan is going to be some of the slip lining projects that Jeff and Public Works has planned for the Providence Hill neighborhood, and that'll be upcoming this summer. So we're really excited to get that underway and hopefully start seeing some results from this I&I remediation. We're putting some funding toward. I think it will be a good effort overall. Moving on from, if there are no other questions at this juncture, moving on from that report, again, I have the system report there for your information to look through. Again, you may notice some differences in my report versus the system report, and that's just a factor of accruals and trying to give you a true 9-month snapshot. Moving on toward the end of the financial report onto some of the revenue graphs, I just want to touch briefly on that. Again, I know there were some questions at the last meeting where we stand to previous years. So looking at lodging tax first, we've had just shy of $300,000 in lodging tax collections through April of this year. And so this, of course, with the 1-month lag, reflects 9 months. So that's about 18% down from FY20, where we were year to date a year ago, and about 23% where we were 2 years ago in FY19. So definitely some drop off from previous years, no doubt. It's had a significant impact on lodging tax collections. The good news, however, we're so far 11% above what we budgeted. We budgeted a pretty significant decrease, about 40% in lodging tax revenues. So we're performing above budget. If the averages hold out, I've done some calculations at the bottom that we are projected right now to finish about $39,000 above budget for the year, above total budget. So that would be about 11% over budget for the year if the averages continue to hold. I think we'll see some improvement. So far, our lodging tax collections, sneak peek of May, if you will, are extremely strong. So I think we'll even outperform this estimate from the early returns so far. Moving on down to the next category for sales. And again, sales has been the most, one of the most interesting things to watch this year. Very little impact. COVID really hasn't had much of an impact on sales tax. We've seen about 1.7% of growth year to date over FY20. And that's about 10.5% growth from where we were in FY19. So sales tax continues to plug right along. You see a sharp upswing from April to May collections, which is fantastic to see. Other than that, if you just visually look at the graph, a lot of the trends historically have kind of remained the same with FY20 and FY19 compared to this year. So a lot of those trends just continue to remain the same, and overall sales tax continues to grow and creep upward, which we like to see. If you, again, take the averages, just making a projection right now, I can project that we'll finish about $350,000 over budget in sales if our averages hold out. So looking forward to another strong quarter of sales tax revenues in the fourth quarter. Moving on to meals tax. Meals tax, had a pretty strong first quarter into the second quarter, and then trailed off a little bit in December, January, and February, but has now begun a very sharp upswing. So our collections thus far are just a little over $1 million. That's down 11% from year to date from FY20 and down 7% from FY19. However, we're about 39% above budget for what we planned for the year thus far through 9 months. Again, looking at the averages and projecting where we may finish, that's a difference of about $380,000. We may finish over budget, if these averages hold out over the last quarter. And so far, I can say May collections for meals also look incredibly strong through the 20th of the month. So again, very optimistic on how we'll end with meals tax. And finally, I've put up our a revenue graph where we stand for water sewer revenues. Just looking where we are, where we stand thus far in the year, with about a little over $4 million in collections so far for this year. Obviously, that's 6% and then 18% respectively over FY20 and 19, and that has a lot to do with rate increases. However, we are lagging behind budget for the year. We're down 7.5% where we should be with budget if we look at it on a straight line. So right now, I'm projecting that we will fall short of revenues in water sewer. And again, I think this has a lot to do with the dip in consumption that you saw between November and late January, early February. So we are projecting that revenues will possibly fall short at this point. We would have to, in order to make budget, average about $580,000 a month in billings over the next 3 months, which I just don't see happening at this point. I think we can improve upon the $430,000 projected shortfall in revenues, but I'm not at this point willing to project that we will make budget. I think that would be a tall task at this point. So unfortunately, some reduced consumption has impacted our water sewer revenues for the year, but we'll be monitoring this very carefully, especially with the rate increases that are in place for next year. So with that, I'll take any other questions that there may be on our financials and any other comments that may be there among council.
Jake, I had a question on the federal categorical. You noted that we returned some CARES money from that was for the electoral board and the registrar. We did spend a little over $15,000. Was that, was that mostly in materials and capital improvements or salaries for the extra workers?
It was a little bit of a mix. It was some additional materials and supplies. It did cover some extra officers of election for the primary that occurred, and then as well as the November general election last year. So a little bit of mix between personnel and supplies. And this came from a separate pool within the CARES fund. This wasn't the CRF money that the city received. This is separate funding that the Department of Elections received through the Help America Vote Act of the CARES Act. So we were hoping maybe we could hang on to those funds a little longer. I know they pushed the date out for CARES, but we were pretty promptly requested to return unspent funds by the Department of Elections. So we did so.
Okay. Do you foresee if we continue voting the same style, having the early voting? I guess they haven't made any note if there'll be extra funding. I know we did get some extra funding in our regular budget, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at this point, the state regulations on voting have changed to where they are going to continue to offer the 45-day in-person voting leading up to election days. So I don't see any change in that at this time. That may be something down the road that they re-examine, but that's still in effect for this year.
Thanks.
Just another thanks for going through the revenue graphs year to date back to 19 and 20. I think that's very helpful to also see the tabulated percentages below those graphs. So appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks.
I think it's worth noting that a year ago, council was working towards adopting a budget and went to what now appears to be extreme measures, reducing budget projections by 40% in these categories. And we had to cut to the bone and cut out a lot of capital projects that were planned. So my hat's off to council for being very prudent and embracing the circumstances related to the pandemic, and staff for carrying it out and getting us through a year without diminished services. Short recycling, I don't know that there were any services that were reduced or eliminated in a meaningful way. So thank you all for carrying it out in a very successful first 3 quarters of the year, and anxiously await your report in July, August for the conclusion of the year. If there are no other questions from this presentation, we'll move on to the public hearing. And public hearing and consideration of ordinance 2021-06, incorporating the budget amendments for the third quarter of fiscal year 2021. And Jake, if you'd like to speak to that.
Certainly, thank you. So just a few appropriations for the third quarter. Starting off in the general fund. So the $60,000 that council had previously approved for improvements to the wall and gate entrance at Evergreen Cemetery. This requires appropriation. So with this, the Historic Lexington Foundation really kind of took the lead once these funds were approved in organizing this project and setting up the contractor to come on site and do the work. So, at that point, we thought the cleanest way, since they really took the lead on this and engaged the contractor, obviously we can't pay another entity's bills, but we thought the cleanest way of handling this was to reimburse them and treat this as a grant request from Historic Lexington Foundation. So the total expense for the improvements was $45,000, and this amount, there's no extra fees or anything like that to Historic Lexington Foundations, simply to reimburse them for the contractor costs. And this leaves $15,000 of the $60,000 approved for any additional landscaping or other projects that, as may be recommended by staff and approved by council for Evergreen Cemetery. Secondly, $10,000 requires appropriation. This is a competitive litter and recycling grant awarded by VDEQ. This one is a partnership between the city and Boxerwood Education Association for their composting program. The city is administering these funds on behalf of Boxerwood as they implement their program. So these additional funds from this competitive grant also require appropriation to our budget. And finally, in the school fund, $8,759 is requested by the schools for appropriation. And this is requested from within their fund balance, the school future needs funding. And the balance of this funding is $85,081. And Superintendent Walters, I believe at the retreat and a couple, maybe at the joint work session as well, mentioned some projects, some small projects that she would like to accomplish relating to carpet replacement at the school board office and some painting at Waddell Elementary School this fiscal year. So they at this time would like to request appropriation for these funds for these two projects. Again, they're very encouraged that revenues will exceed expenditures for the year, so they will in all likelihood be able to replenish what they're appropriating from fund balance. But they did want to go ahead and accomplish these projects this time and request the appropriation. So those are the only appropriations we have for the end of the third quarter. If there are no other questions or comments, we'd recommend adoption of Ordinance 2106, incorporating third quarter budget amendments.
Thank you, Jake. And suffice to say, relatively speaking, with the general fund and that work that was led by HLF, that freed up staff to work on other projects. So is a very kind contribution, if you will, partnering with HLF to get that accomplished.
Absolutely.
And if you haven't been by Evergreen to see the work, I encourage you to do so. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. And I'm not aware of anyone who wanted to speak to it, but Janie, if you can verify that we didn't have anybody write in or join the meeting that would like to speak to this.
I don't have anyone.
Thank you, Janie. Then it's 7:35. We will close the public hearing, and I would ask for council's consideration.
I make a motion that we adopt ordinance 2021-06 to incorporate the budget amendments for the third quarter of FY21.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler, and Ms. Strawn with the second. Any discussion of council? Hearing none, would ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Jake, thank you for your good work and your team's efforts to keep all the beans counted and in the right place. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next item is consideration of the minutes. They were provided in your packet. And unless there are any objection from council, we'll accept the minutes as presented. Hearing none, they are adopted unanimously. Next item is citizens' remarks and comments. I'm not aware of anyone that wanted to speak to council this evening, but I know we had one written communication that Janie's posting for us. And Ms. Alexander, you are the lucky reader tonight, and call on you when you're prepared to read that into the record.
Doris and James Vargo, dear city government, please indulge my stating my opinion once again. I live at 407 Spotswood Drive, right across from the proposed sale to build multi-housing. Of course, you can imagine that it will change our entire neighborhood. Instead, I would like you to consider a community effect of building this amount of residential units. Briefly, 1, it would create a real bottleneck at the entrance of Nelson Street, vehicle after vehicle with a backup well into Main Street and standing vehicles on Spotswood Drive. There is no room for a merge lane or right turn lane at Hampton Inn. 2, the increased congestion would interfere with the entrance to the hospital and medical centers, complicating the drive to emergency services. 3, consider that these residential units would mainly be occupied by childbearing age residents with multi-children, often per unit, that would increase the need for more teachers, special services, and possible building of new rooms added to school plans. As a retired Virginia teacher, I understand the extra burden of class size when a lot of influx of population happens. 4, it would be far better to propose residential units which would attract plus 55 people that spend money and do not require as many services. 5, although there are monetary reasons to sell the property, there are real changes to the Lexington brand, a small town with quality lifestyles. 6, it is probable that there will have to be new traffic lights installed to manage the traffic trying to enter Route 60 from the proposed housing units. In summary, with the reasons above and even more, it is a change that takes serious step. Don't lose our small town. This is how it starts as the first step. Thank you for your service and for making difficult decisions. Best wishes to all of you. Doris and James Vargo, 407 Spotswood Drive.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. And that concludes the citizens' remarks and comments for this evening. Next item on the agenda is consent agenda request from Sasha Golubov for street closures in order to host the Juneteenth celebration on Saturday, June 19th, and ask for council's consideration.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Second.
And Mr. Ziegler with the second. As this is a consent agenda item, it does not require discussion, and I would ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Ms. Strong,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. Mark your calendars and be ready for a great celebration on the 19th of June in downtown Lexington. Unfinished business, update on the Spotswood Development Project. Mr. Hallis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As noted in the briefing, as of midday Friday when the agenda went out, I had not seen or received any communication from the Rockbridge Area Relief Association as to an offer or any other response to City Council. However, late in the day Friday, I did receive an offer from RARA. And of course, my recommendation is that City Council go into closed session to discuss and review that offer. Aside from that, there have been no other communications as to any other projects or that have been committed, proposed, and nothing new as well. So again, my recommendation is go into closed session and to review that offer from RARA.
Thank you, Mr. Hallis. Members of council have any questions? Very good. Next item, boards and commissions, Blue Ridge Resource Authority, Mr. Smith.
Blue Ridge Resource Authority. Man, I had it written down. Now I can't find it. Everything's moving along great. We adopted our budget last meeting with no tipping fee increases, and that was pretty much the highlight of our last meeting. So status quo, business as usual. Construction on cell 2. I think we're still waiting on DEQ to sign off on the engineering. Jake, where are we at on that?
I believe that is the case. Unfortunately, it's just taken longer than anticipated, but
Yeah.
I think that's where we stand.
And hopefully once DEQ gives the okay on that, construction can start. Should last hopefully not much longer than 6 months, and then we can start throwing our solid waste in our new landfill depression.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions from Mr. Smith? Main Street Lexington.
I just want to remind everyone of Rock the Bricks, which will be held Saturday, May 29th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. in Hopkins Green. So join us for a day of history, art, and music. We will be selling authentic Lexington bricks, and you can pre-order your bricks now at mainstreetlexington.org. There will also be a silent auction for beautiful birdhouses built by Dustin Wilhelm and decorated by local artisans and crafters. In Main Street Lexington, we'll have a retreat on June 10th. A representative from Main Street, Virginia will facilitate our meeting. In the meantime, board members have been assigned to downtown businesses to get to know the owners, understand who their customer base is, and find out how they weathered 2020. And then the feedback will be discussed at the retreat. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Where will you all hold your retreat, or will it be in Zoom?
I believe it will be in person, but in the location and the time have yet to be announced.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions for Ms. Strong? Planning Commission.
Sure. The Planning Commission met on Thursday, May 13th, and we unanimously approved an application by Julia and Charles Brown for a preliminary subdivision to vacate shared boundary lines between parcels at 597 Ross Road. We also unanimously approved an application by Nicholas Murphy for a master plan amendment for the Sigma Nu Educational Foundation property located at 9 North Lewis Street. And the most significant change is relocation of the proposed Center for Excellence and modification of the building design. And both of these applications will come before council at our next meeting. And as part of our annual zoning amendments, we increased the total allowable signage in the C2 district so that it was consistent with a previous change we had made. And we'll have a public hearing on our first batch of zoning amendments at our next meeting on May 27th. And mark the calendars for a joint meeting between Council and Planning Commission on July 1 prior to our regular City Council meeting. And that's all I have unless there's any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Strong. And thank you to the Planning Commission for their good work, and we look forward to partying together July 1. Regional Tourism Board, Mr. Ayers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tourism met on May 19th, and we approved our fiscal year 22 budget and also voted on and deliberated on $8,650 in grants to 10 different organizations. Grants range from $400 to $1,600, and tourism staff is now reaching out to the various organizations to let them know. The benefit lunch last month at the Visitor Center raised nearly $1,600 for the nonprofit organizations that would have participated in the Freedom Food Festival this year. That unfortunately was canceled due to COVID. That festival will return in July of 2022. Tourism Director Gene Clark alerted the board that tourism is having a bit of difficulty hiring part-time staffers for the 3 visitor centers these days. Hourly pay for new hires is currently $9 an hour, and the board directed Gene to explore raising part-time hourly pay for visitor center part-time staff. And so we may have to amend our budget as required, but we believe it's doable. You might have noticed a film crew in downtown Lexington on Tuesday. They were in the area filming a TV spot for a new prescription drug to treat Parkinson's. Regional Tourism coordinated with the Virginia Film Commission to help them scout locations to film. I'm not sure exactly where they went. I know they went out to Goshen Pass. So if you see Goshen Pass on a prescription ad, you'll know what that was about. The Small Business Incubator Program Gauntlet, which Buena Vista participated in, has selected its 3 finalists, all of which will need to open businesses in Buena Vista in order to receive the prize money. They are an adult daycare service, a bakery, and a bed and breakfast. And finally, the latest visitor guide is going to the printer at the end of this month, and hopefully we'll be able to distribute it by the end of June. And that's all I have, if anybody has any questions.
One question. What did you say that they're paying for the tour guides right now?
The visitor center staff, if you're newly hired, it's $9, and that's, it's very hard to find somebody knowledgeable at that price these days. So we need to revisit that, and we certainly are.
I think minimum wage is now $9.50.
Oh, I'm sorry. Not you're absolutely right. It's $9.50. So we were paying them the minimum wage, and
Okay.
so yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ayers, and exciting to see things firing up for tourism and more people flowing into town.
Yep.
Raro, Mr. Ziegler,
No report.
would you like to expound upon that? Just kidding. For my report, brevity as well, I bring to you a couple of appointments. First, for the Industrial Development Authority, Felicia Bush has agreed to another term that would run through May 1st of 2025. And I'd ask for your consideration for Felicia.
I move to appoint Felicia to the IDA for the term specified.
Second.
I have a motion, Ms. Strawn, and a second, Mr. Smith. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. The next two I'll do together. The Blue Ridge Criminal Justice Board. Historically, Lexington has had 2 appointees, and we have the availability for 3. Tonight, I bring to you Chief Green and City Manager Hallis to be appointed. I was unable to locate exactly what the term would be, so we will leave it open-ended at this point. But if you're not familiar with the goal of Blue Ridge Court Services and the Blue Ridge Criminal Justice Board is to help those who want help and to make sure the court's imposed sentences are carried out. Blue Ridge Court Services hold the offender accountable and work closely with local law enforcement, courts, Commonwealth Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office, defense attorneys, as well as the various treatment facilities in the Shenandoah Valley. The court services uses community service sites throughout the county. All community service sites must be nonprofit organizations, and they bill themselves as they are not an alternative to punishment, but an alternative form of punishment to be carried out. So I think this group does good work and would ask for your consideration of appointment for Chief Green and City Manager Hallis.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, David, and a second by Chuck. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Strong,
Aye.
Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much, and thank you for your service, City Manager and Chief. Just wanted to share one piece of information. I received a communication from Columbia Gas of Virginia, which is required by state code. Their application for authorization to amend and extend its conservation and rate-making efficiency plan pursuant to Chapter 25 of Title 56 of the Code of Virginia. And just worth noting, it's referred to as the CARE Plan, Conservation and Rate-Making Efficiency. Extending this, the 3-year extension that they're looking at will provide for a $5.3 million capital expense for this program, and a very worthwhile program for conservation. If you have questions on it, by all means, let me know. I'm glad to share the language with you. And with that, I will call on the city manager for his report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief update on COVID. I think we're all aware that the governor has relaxed his restrictions on mask wearing. Only those who are not vaccinated have to wear a mask, or we requested to wear a mask. However, City Hall will still be a mask environment until June 8th. And the primary reason for that is at this time of year, we have a large amount of people in City Hall paying taxes, and it's a small space. And we want to assure all those folks that come on in to pay their taxes or do out of their city business that it is a safe environment. After June 8th, we will comply with the governor's requirements, and that is that people who are fully vaccinated are not going to be required to wear a mask at that time. So we'll also see other changes in the governor's restrictions or loosening, but those typically will not affect City Hall. Little update on the street renaming policy. The policy, of course, was passed. The city staff has now completed the petition form that is required if anyone wants to work on renaming streets. The policy will be attached and sent to you for your review, distribution, and to provide to the public if that's helpful. American Rescue Plan funds, another topic that's being discussed recently. It's been reported that we will receive up to $1.4 million. That seems very certain. The payment's supposed to be received in a 50-50 allocation. 50% was due last week, and we haven't seen it, so maybe it'll come next week. And of course, that would be a $700,000 payment, and the next payment is supposed to be received approximately a year after the first payment. Of course, the reason for the delay is that the U.S. Treasury has not been able to provide complete guidance, nor have they been able to get these funds out to the cities, counties, and towns, states throughout the country. In addition to that, any portion of this award that may flow through the state will take an additional 30 days for the state to get out to localities. So again, there will be some delay there in all likelihood. However, it's hard to be too critical when we're getting checks that we did not expect. In another aspect of the American Rescue Plan funds, the state itself, aside from local distributions, is expected to receive $4.3 billion, and yes, that is billions of dollars. And the governor has announced his priorities for which the funding could be used. And of his top 5 priorities, he's looking at public health, aid to businesses, employment support, and rounding out the top 5 are school support and broadband. And it is widely anticipated that a large portion of these funds will be provided to statewide programs and to localities to implement the priorities established by the state. In a similar vein, recently, Senator Mark Warner has introduced a bill entitled the Rural Jobs Act, and the act would designate $500 million in new market tax credits for rural job zones across the nation. Senator Warner contends that the COVID pandemic and the changes in the U.S. economy continue to leave rural America behind in economic opportunities. The act is labeled as bipartisan legislation, but it remains to be seen if it passes or what its impact may be. Another bit of good news, the Department of Historic Resources had notified the city that they would like to place a historic marker in front of the Lilburn Downing School, commemorating its historic significance. City schools, DPW staff, and Eric Wilson from the Rockbridge Historic Society are working with DHR to review the marker's text and the location of the marker on site. However, the approval won't be in place until this summer, so we're likely not to see the marker until this fall. Earlier, I announced that the Public Works Department is reviewing and evaluating various city parks to determine where the greatest priorities and needs lie to make improvements to existing parks, and working off both the observation and review of parks and park needs in the field, as well as historical rating of park projects. Several projects were selected for immediate funding if available. These projects are completing the Richardson Park play area, resurfacing the Brubaker Field basketball court, replacing play equipment in Limekiln Park, and installing a picnic pavilion in Limekiln Park. Total funds needed for these projects is a minimum of $160,000, and in fact, it'll probably be significantly larger as 2 of the projects have not seen a price update since 2019. And I need to state that we know we had additional funds for parks, but funding does not exist to complete all of these projects that are being reviewed. So we'll still, at staff level, spend a little time trying to determine what can be done for the money available. Little update from the Lexington Fire Department, and the EMS staff is working with the Carilion Emergency Room staff and the department's operational medical director, Dr. Sheridan, to train for significant review activities in order to better manage these types of serious cases when the department responds. The department continues to also support COVID vaccination clinics in our area, and the emphasis now is on smaller clinics targeted towards a specific need or audience. And at the last council meeting, I have to note that I reported that the estate of Miss Helen Staten Fix had donated $5,000 to the department, and unfortunately I was incorrect. That was a $50,000 donation, and many thanks to Miss Fix and her family. DPW is always very busy, spreading their time and efforts throughout the community, working on numerous areas. Most recently, they have been undertaking repairs to the upper deck walls of the parking structure, supervising work on the Evergreen Cemetery entrance, testing for unknown water connections where water use is not being billed but consumed, and 3 have been located in the city. And of course, they will now be billed. The annual street resurfacing program has been bid and will start soon after July 1, and Adams Construction was the low bidder. Repairs were made to the Campbell Lane pump station, and that pump station had been seriously underperforming, and we're trying to make sure we understand why and make those repairs. They also replaced brick sidewalk on Highland Street, conducted annual traffic sign repair and maintenance, conducted water line replacement in Maple Lane, completed the Moores Creek Dam inspection, and developed drawings for the Enfield Road 15-inch stormwater sewer that's proposed. On the personnel front, I regret to note that the city and schools have lost another excellent longtime employee. Tommy Roberts, who served in the schools and city finance offices, has resigned to take on a new position at Washington Lee. Tommy has been with the city and schools for just over 9 years and claims that all 4 of the city managers he's worked for during that time have been good folks. I tried to help him understand that since he's already leaving, he does not need to classify me with the better managers Lexington has had. However, Tommy is both a great employee and a gentleman. Tommy's last day is going to be June 9th, unfortunately, and we'll now have to work to replace him, and it's going to be a tall order. And Mr. Mayor, council members, that is my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
First, I'm sorry to see Tommy go. I'm sure it's a good job opportunity for him, but I hate to lose him. And then on the parks, you mentioned $160,000 worth of projects and said we don't have the funding. My recollection is we've budgeted or allotted $150,000 roughly, but some of that is for Jordan's Point as well. We know at least 50 and we were going to put more.
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Yeah, that is correct. We actually have in total close to the funding that would required for these projects, but we have allocated some of that designated for Jordan's Point Park. And of the remaining 15,000 that's generally there for park maintenance, it will probably be, some of that would be needed in some of the other parks just for exactly that, for maintenance and minor repairs. So for major projects, we just don't have enough to cover all 4 of those projects at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Would you clarify again, there were folks not being charged for water? Is that?
Frankly, when we start looking at larger institutions, and this is primarily Washington Lee and VMI, some of the facilities that have been built over the years had water lines installed to the facilities, or water lines were moved, services, and sometimes not recorded. No meters were put on those lines. And so water has been being used by several of those buildings on the Washington and Lee campus, and that water did not go through city meters. Since we know we've had some additional water loss in the system, we've been trying to figure out where the commodities lost are quite large. And so we immediately went to those 2 larger consumers, and we did find that looking at our master meters, there were some water losses at WNL that were not attributed to leaks. And so we zeroed in on the location and found 3 buildings that had been receiving water and not billed.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions for the city manager? Jim, if you could, you mentioned it quickly and I didn't pick up on it all, but you were talking about a contribution of 5,000 that was actually 50,000. Could you just recap that scenario, what that was about?
Well, the estate of, and I don't have it in front of me, but Miss Staten Fix, who has been a longtime friend of the department. She's lived in the city for any number of years. And she and her estate decided to contribute money to the department. That money was going to be put aside for the volunteers and for those sort of offline uses that the city typically does not fund. And that's how it'll be used. We have an account for that that has always been available. It's typically not a very well-funded account. We don't get those kind of donations regularly, but this will help a lot of times. I don't know if the chief is with us, yes, but he can give us some additional information if you desire.
You are correct, sir. That is the mistake on the misinformation was a typo on my part. Of the information that I initially gave to the city manager, I left a 0 off. You'll remember that about a year ago, Margaret Davis from North Lewis Street died and left a donation to the estate. And just earlier this week, we placed an order for a personalized bench for behind the fire department to recognize both Ms. Fix and Ms. Davis for their support and donation to the department from their estates.
Terrific. Very, very generous of those individuals and certainly reflect the respect that they had for the work that you all do. I remember there being a fund for the rescue squad that was fairly well funded, but for use for the members, the volunteers, to get things that they needed as they did their work. So as times evolve, I'd like to pause and thank them for the contributions that they've made in recognition of your all's good work. So thank you both, Ty and Jim, for taking a couple minutes to put some context around that generous gift.
And along those lines, I think, again, it's worth noting and uplifting the great work. And I know that you read earlier in the meeting, Frank, something about fire and rescue essentially, but you know, it's not just the city residents that benefit from the agreement, and that it's a lot of county residents that also receive the great care and support. And so it's an agreement that really serves so many folks. And it's one of those situations where, you know, I think the municipalities really work well together to the benefit of the taxpayers. And I think it's a testament to the Rockbridge County Board of Supervisors and City Council for how well we get along together to make sure that that agreement is continually renewed and that the service, there's never a drop off of service to our residents when it comes to public safety. So thanks, Chief Dickerson, again, and thanks, Jim, and you know, special thanks to the County Board of Supervisors for always also being supportive of that agreement.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate everybody's support. I mean, those are the things that give us the tools to be able to deliver the highest quality and caliber of service that we can.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And anything else for the city manager?
I have a follow-up question associated with the newly found water lines that haven't been metered. Was there any sense of how long, in terms of years, those connections have been operational? And secondly, was there any sense of how much revenue might have been associated with those lines, just from an estimated point of view?
I did not ask the Public Works Director, Jeff Martone, about the ages of the buildings and or when those service lines may have been installed. So based on that, you know, I don't have a range of years where I could calculate what revenues have been lost. And of course, over the years, as rates went up, that would have been an increasing dollar amount. So we could probably go back a few years and provide some estimates, but you know, other than that, I couldn't help you with anything really solid at this point.
Well, you could, just not you personally, but you generally could take a look at the consumption of those buildings now and come up with an estimate.
Yes, we could, again, for maybe the past several years, but we'd have to do quite an extensive amount of research to find out what the rates were 5, 6, 10, 14 years ago to do a dollar calculation. So see if we can look at maybe 3 to 5 years of what that might amount to, where we know those rates and it's pretty constant.
Right, and I think that would be helpful to have a sense of it.
We'll see what we can do, sir.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else for the city manager, call on Jared Jenkins, city attorney.
Good evening, everyone. I have no report tonight, though, as always, happy to answer any questions. And it's once again time to recertify the ordinance allowing electronic meetings. And just a brief reminder that it allows it but does not require it. So we can recertify tonight, and that will give us the option going forward to either remain electronic or to begin meeting in person.
Very good. Thank you, Jared. Council, you've heard the city attorney's recommendation and it asks for your consideration.
So moved.
Hopefully for the last time, second.
Thank you, Dennis, with the motion, Chuck with the second. Any discussion?
So has there been an update from the governor's office as far as lifting the declaration?
I'm sorry, council member, I didn't hear that last part of your question.
Has there been any update from the governor's office about how long they will continue to allow the emergency executive order 51?
No, ma'am, I've not heard that there's been any guidance as to how long that emergency act or order will stay in place.
Okay. And as a council, do we have a schedule of when we will meet in person yet?
I would like to suggest, I've talked with the school superintendent, Rebecca Walters, that we could get into Lilburn Downing for the second meeting of June. The first meeting, they're still busy with SOLs and some of the end of the year activities, and they prefer we're not there because of the setups they have for the testing. But they have, it's wide open for that second meeting of June if city council is interested in resuming meetings in person.
I think that's worth circling the calendar and see if we can work to that. Certainly hope that our meeting with the Planning Commission can be in person and also be compliant. So, but great question, Leslie. And yeah, personally, I had hoped that when the governor was allowing for the lack of use of masks, that he would have also included rescinding the emergency order. But at this point, he's not done that. So we continue in that state, and some of our peers, of course, have been meeting in person, and look forward to when we can get together in person. And that's meeting in June looks like a good time, unless something occurs between now and then. Because I think everybody on council and staff are all vaccinated and cured, if you will, of a couple weeks. So done all the things that we can do to do it as safely as possible, meet safely as possible. If nothing else for the city attorney.
We didn't vote, sorry. Got
carried away. A roll call vote. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Strong.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. And we will, for the immediate future, continue to Zoom. Anything else for the city attorney? Hearing none. New business. Mr. Chalice, discussion of a cigarette tax.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I think all of City Council is probably aware that the General Assembly recently amended the state code and permitted counties in the Commonwealth to put in place a cigarette tax. And you may or may not have known, but cities have had this option for many years. However, a number of cities have never put the tax in place because without the tax in surrounding counties, the sales would have probably bled out into those other counties, and some of the other types of sales of products and goods would have gone with the cigarette sales. So it wasn't always uniformly adopted. But however, since the legislation has been approved, a number of the local counties in our region have been discussing the possibility of a tax. They've even had public hearings. And as you probably understand, Rockbridge County Board of Supervisors did consider and discuss a 30-cent per pack tax at their April 26th board meeting, but they have not taken any action. At an administrative level throughout the valley, the managers and county administrators have been discussing cigarette taxes and what our government bodies may do, what we may recommend. And pretty uniformly in the southern end of the valley in particular, we sort of settled on looking at 30 cents a pack. No particular reason for that. It's sort of the middle of the range of what the taxes have been. Some communities have taxed significantly lower across the state, but we felt that that was pretty reasonable and would develop revenues that would be worth pursuing. If you charge too little a pack, the cost of putting the tax in place, administering it, personnel involved, really doesn't make it something that would be reasonable to pursue. Just an example, Amherst County did adopt a 27-cent tax rate. This year, Allegheny County thus far is not pursuing the tax. Augusta County is recommending a 30-cent tax per pack, and the cities of Stanton and Waynesboro already do tax at 30 cents a pack. Bath County also has not discussed this tax. Vodacott County has not discussed it. Buena Vista is considering a 30-cent tax rate, and Rockbridge County, of course, as I noted earlier, has already brought it up to their Board of Supervisors, but has not taken action. So uniformly, if we were to look at the southern end of the valley, if Lexington, Buena Vista, and Rockbridge counties, Augusta County adopt 30 cents a pack, then all the valley south of Augusta, including Augusta, Stanton, and Waynesboro, would be charging 30 cents a pack. Now, while we really can't give you a good estimate at this time, Finance Director Jake and I have talked about this. We don't know what we collect, but certainly putting it in place would increase revenues, likely because we've already got a balanced budget. We wouldn't have to pursue using those revenues. If we were to put it in place and implement it the first of the year, we could spend 6 months monitoring what we might have for revenues during that time frame. And when we put together the FY23 budget, we'd have a pretty good estimate to work with. So that's what I'd recommend going forward, is that really that City Council would consider this tax very strongly and carefully. If it's approved, not budgeted at this point in time as revenue that we expend. And tonight, basically, I'd ask council to consider holding a public hearing at the June 3rd council meeting. City attorney has already worked on the ordinance and what is required to approve that tax if council is so interested. And this is one of those revenues we've not collected. There are really a very balanced set of revenues, access to revenues across the state. And this is just one of those that we have not taken advantage of, but we can in the future. And I would recommend that council move in that direction. Any questions?
Thank you, Jim. Council, what questions do you have?
So I had to kind of look to see what a pack of cigarettes cost. And I guess they range, but up to $6 on average, like up to $6 for one pack. And so 30 cents would be about a 5% additional tax. And I think the state already adds their own tax on there of roughly something I read 86 cents. So I'm just trying to, wrap my mind around the impact on people. I mean, obviously, smoking is poor for people's health. And if an additional cost is a deterrent, maybe someone will quit. But a carton of cigarettes is 10 packs. And so my question is there any tax on smokeless tobacco, or is this only cigarettes? Because all tobacco can be harmful.
I have not heard that we have the ability to tax smokeless tobacco. Not heard it discussed at all. So it may exist, but I think my fellow city managers and administrators, somebody would have heard this and brought it up.
Sure. And I figured that was the case. I just bring that up. And then is there any concern that to the south of us and to the west of us are not talking about this, and that could be harmful to potentially, Rockbridge County, their collections? I mean, I think the city, it wouldn't make sense financially to drive 40 miles to save 30 cents on a pack. But just before we take on the power of imposing a tax, I just do want to have the whole picture and not have some unintended consequences.
I do know the county administrator, Spencer Suter, has been watching this very carefully. Frankly, he and the county administrator up in Augusta have had the most conversation. I-81 is, of course, a big corridor. A lot of trucks move up and down that corridor. My understanding that some of those truckers might stop along the truck stops and buy a significant number of cartons of cigarettes and take up to the northeast. So that's why they want to move in tandem, Augusta County and Rockbridge, so that they don't rob sales from each other. I have not heard that is important or much of a concern to the south or to the west on I-64.
In regard to the south of us, Roanoke County is getting ready to start January 1st of 22 at 25 cent per package. Roanoke City has already had that started there years ago, and currently they're at 54 cents. By the time, from what this document says, they haven't discussed it yet. So with everybody around them having the tax, perhaps that will give them cause to start talking about it. Even Vinton has it, and Salem.
I think you mentioned, sorry.
I was
What?
curious how long Stanton and Waynesboro have had their taxes in effect, and see if they can share any information on the impact that's had in their localities.
I don't know how long they've had that tax. I can certainly check and see if by impact you mean what kind of sales they may have lost.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's mostly anecdotal. I know in the past when the subject of a cigarette tax came up to city council, it was always, there wasn't much support from City Hall for the reasons you explained, but now that everybody's on board, it seems it's hard to say, kind of hard to say no to it. But be curious to hear what Stanton and Waynesboro and I guess to Maryland's point, Roanoke City and Vinton and Salem might share after what they've learned and as a result.
Typically, we do get together weekly still on Zoom, managers and administrators. So next time I can get on with them, I will ask, see if they can share anything.
Jim, you may have mentioned this at a previous meeting, but e-cigarettes, do they get taxed in any way? And I assume this does not cover it.
I don't believe so.
And they're not.
I may be wrong on that, but again, it has not come up. The ordinances have to be pretty specific. I believe, Jared, I think it mentions the amount per cigarette that the tax is. And I sort of, like David, had to do some research to see, how many cigarettes are actually in a pack. I never really looked that carefully. So I hope the amount per cigarette multiplied by the number of cigarettes would equal the 30 cents a pack, which it does. But you have to go to that extent to approve the ordinance. So I didn't see anything about e-cigarettes in any of the county ordinances or city ordinances I reviewed. Either it's not worthwhile or it's just not allowed.
Okay.
Again, for council's benefit, two pieces of information. One, Rockbridge County has approved with an implementation date of January 1. They do plan to revisit the proposal in October, depending upon how budget's going and things are looking. But this is the first year the General Assembly has allowed counties to be able to implement a cigarette tax. And Rockbridge County is scheduled to begin theirs January 1st. The two cities and the county have worked collaboratively on addressing this and working in tandem conceptually and to roll out perhaps around the same time. And would note that city staff is recommending, unless there's an objection tonight, not to, we will work towards having a public hearing on June 3rd meeting and with consideration for a cigarette tax to be implemented on or about the same time.
Jim, quick question. Can you remind me, I know that when we talked about this earlier, there was some concern that the state was going to require different localities to kind of join together to set up a regional agency to kind of administer these taxes. And is that still a possibility in the future? And if we do a tax now, will it help us to be grandfathered in so we don't have to join one of those things? I mean, my concern, of course, is if there is a regional agency handling this, then a significant proportion of the collected tax would go to that agency for the administration costs.
Nothing is in place at this point that indicates we must do that, but a committee has been put in place as part of this legislation to explore the possibility of modernizing the tax collection system. And this was requested by the wholesalers and retailers who have to buy the cigarette stamps and then stamp the cigarettes and distribute them to all localities. That is a somewhat burdensome task from their perspective. So yes, I believe that that's the intention of the legislation, and the intention of setting up that committee is to put in place regional agencies that would then administer these taxes on a uniform basis. Earlier, I'd heard that the agencies had to incorporate somewhere between 12 and 14 different entities to make it more efficient from the state's point of view. Of course, I don't know what the committee may report out. And again, our neighbors, counties, and cities have discussed, should that occur, could we, and hopefully the committee would allow this, or any legislation would allow this, could we voluntarily form some type of a board or entity that could, as you say, minimize the cost and the bureaucracy of having a separate agency collect these taxes on our behalf. But it's an unknown now. Probably going to occur would be my guess, but it is unknown.
Terrific. Any other questions for the city manager or city attorney regarding our consideration of a cigarette tax? Hearing none, would ask city manager to introduce 15.2, our added item, the forest swimming proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as I think you've noticed, if you had a chance to read the request from Friends of Rockbridge Swimming, we did put in place an agreement with them to run the pool, the outdoor pool this summer, based on the expectation that we, as a society, as a community, would still be dealing with the restrictions of COVID. And they were putting a swimming program in place based on a reservation system that they put in place last year that was very successful under the circumstances we had to work with. However, they found out, as we all did just a few days ago, that the governor was going to lift those restrictions. And so the question that they are pondering, and they'd like some guidance from city council, is, do we want to open the pool fully as we have currently, I should say previously, managed and opened the pool for the community? Or would you like the Friends of Rockbridge Swimming to move forward with the proposal that we had agreed earlier to? Friends of Rockbridge Swimming, when I spoke with them, are very enthusiastic about trying to provide as many services or as much service as they can to the community. However, the system they'd put in place with reservations was a very known commodity. You had so many people in the pool at a certain time, and you knew how many lifeguards you needed based on the number of people. You knew what your revenues and your expenses were. And so they could manage with certainty. They knew they weren't going to make a great deal of money, if anything, and they wouldn't lose any money. So they were very happy to provide that service to the community. Now, however, costs would go up. You need more lifeguards at the pool if you allow people just to stop by. Hopefully pool use would go up dramatically, but we don't know how much. There are some questions or unknowns as to, will people show up with unvaccinated children or other unvaccinated people and get into the pool? Given that a lot of families and children are in summer programs, educational programs, to try and catch up with learning that maybe did not occur during our COVID experience, will the families then buy a season pass if the kids are in school or in some type of a program for a number of days or weeks during the summer? So those questions are something we can't answer. Some people, by conjecture, would say that maybe more people will show up and get in the pool this summer. So Forest just feels like they cannot take the chance that they would lose any money on this proposition. They're willing to go ahead and provide the service. They have put together some estimates of what those costs could be based on previous year's attendance and a range of, if you will, losses they may suffer. Frankly, based on what they're proposing and their willingness to provide this service, I do believe it's a good proposition for the community, for the city to open the pool up, make it widely available to the community, and sit down with Forest at the end of each month, look at the revenues, look at the expenditures, find out if there's any losses the city would have to or could return to Forest, do a balance at the end of the year to find out, a true up, to find out what the losses may have been. If a lot of people show up, there may be even as a profit. But to be fair with Forest in that regard and make sure that as they've offered this service to us, it's not at their expense and a loss to them and their programs, their facilities as they move forward in the future. I do know that I believe Ms. Joellen Schwartzman is on the line with us, and she could answer additional questions. I guess one more note I would add is that in our last contract with the YMCA, we actually paid them $36,000 a year. The estimates that we see from Forest, in which I will not dispute, indicates that it will be much less, or at least within, certainly well within that that amount that we'd previously paid. And I did want to note also that I had a conversation with Bobby Wagner at the Y. She said that she was thrilled that Friends of Rockbridge Swimming would consider opening the pool with this short of a notice, providing this type of broad service to the community, and that the Y could in no way, with a 10-day notice, put in place a program, hire staff, advertise it, etc. So they had no interest in proceeding. They're very busy with the programs they have in place and have their hands full, and they're very happy to provide the services that they're currently providing. They don't want to take on the outdoor pool at this time. So again, I don't know if Ms. Schwartzman is with us, if she would like to ask anything or provide any further information, or if City Council has any questions for myself or Ms. Schwartzman.
And Joe Ellen is here. Members of council, do you have any questions for Joe Ellen? Hearing none. You've heard the city manager's recommendation and details relative to FOR's ability and YMCA's in support of FOR's providing this service to the city. With that, I would ask for your consideration.
I will definitely am supportive, but I just want to clarify, just so that we're factual, that we did pay the YMCA approximately, it's accurate, the $36,000, but contractually they returned, I believe, over $10,000 to the city. So it was not a $36,000 fee to them, because contractually, based on their profits and revenue, they returned money. So again, that doesn't apply to 2021, and I'm completely supportive of this, but in case people are listening, I don't want to give people the wrong impression about previous contracts. But Mr. Mayor, if you're looking for a motion or just discussion, I mean, I would like to make a motion to allow FOR Swimming to open the pool as safely as they can. And if that requires the city to contribute money midway through the summer on a monthly basis, I'm completely supportive of that since it benefits our residents.
A second.
I have a motion from Mr. Ziegler, a second from Mr. Alligood. Any further discussion?
I would just point out, my sister Leslie Ayers is the aquatics director for FOR Swimming, so I'm not going to participate in discussion or vote on this particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. Ayers. Very good. Any further discussion on this topic? I will just offer up that grateful for the cooperation amongst the city, the YMCA, and FOR Swimming to be able to provide these services. It's not a core function of the city services, but it certainly is a wonderful opportunity to provide a terrific cooling event and opportunity for our citizens. So I'm grateful to all the parties involved. I would ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Mr. Alligood?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
And Mr. Ayers is disqualified from participating. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you all very much. Joe Ellen, thanks for being with us. And more importantly, thank you for your leadership on the FOR's Swimming Board and the great work that you all do in our community to support our children of all ages.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for your time and your support. We appreciate it.
We'll see you at the swimming pool.
Wonderful.
The next item is the closed meeting that the city manager requested. Before we jump into that, I will, before Ms. Alexander reads us into that, I will just offer a welcome to Shauna Munkle, who is a Washington Lee student, on a lovely May evening during May term. Joining council, we're very grateful for your coverage. And if there's anything we can do to support you with your academic endeavors in journalism, please don't hesitate to call on any of council or staff. We appreciate you and support your good work. And with that, Ms. Alexander, if you'll read us into closed session, and we'll opine that we do not intend to take any action when we do come out of closed session other than adjournment.
I move that Lexington City Council will convene in closed meeting in accordance with section 2.2-3711, subsection A, paragraph 3 of the Code of Virginia, a closed session for the purpose of discussing the disposition of real estate for a public purpose.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. We now will go into a roll call vote. Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Sigler,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Mr. Alligood,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Motion carries. Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.